Hello friends! This week for Practical Magic, I'm going to go through Poppets and the basics of how to make them, what's included, the theory behind them, and some examples of both baneful and... wow, my hair is all over the place. Both baneful and sympathetic magic, because Poppets have been used for both. That being said, let's get into it. So as a quick introduction to Poppets, they are little dolls, typically made out of scrap materials that were readily available for the use of distance magic. So traditionally, they are human-shaped. You would put something signifying the heart, eyes, and mouth. And this one is unfinished because it's not actually been keyed to a spell yet. So if you look here, the side is open so that you can put a tag in it, meaning some sort of physical object that is a representation of the person, to key this to a person. Most often, historically, that would have been either their hair, a nail clipping, a drop of their blood, something along those lines. You can also use photographs, or in a pinch, you can just write their name on a piece of paper and slip that inside as well. That being said, multiple traditions use Poppets. You'll hear a lot of discourse online of argumentation over whether who should or should not use them. In my research, I have found that they have been historically used in Europe and in the African diaspora in the United States. And so there's actually differences between the two. I was taught the conjure techniques of how to use them, which is more of the American diaspora conjure stuff. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, because it's just how I do it. There's a lot of different ways. So with that, we're going to change views, and I'm going to actually show you how I construct a Poppet. And like I said, it's usually done with scrap materials. So I have the piece of a pant leg that was left over from hemming a pair of pants. I have a little bit of yarn. This previous one I did with embroidery floss, but I have a little bit of yarn left over from another project. And I have a whole bunch of buttons that I will select appropriate buttons for. One of the other things is traditionally they are filled with Spanish moss. I have also seen them filled with just other pieces of scrap fabric. You know, the little leavings that aren't big enough to be used for anything. I've also seen them be stuffed with that. All depends on what tradition you're coming from. With that, we're going to switch views, and I will do a time lapse of me constructing a Poppet out of my scraps. I start by tracing my stencil. I just made it out of heavy-duty cardboard and have used the same stencil for years. Then I cut out the pieces of the Poppet. Because it was a pant leg, I was able to cut both pieces at the same time. Pull out a heart and 2 buttons. The buttons are going to be the eyes. I prefer doing this with a single thread, usually either yarn or embroidery floss, depending on what I have available. And you'll see I start by putting one eye on and then the other, and I'm just doing the same thread the entire way through. I try to keep the beginning part loose after I put the buttons on, so that I don't really pucker the fabric. And you'll see I started on the wrong side of the arm here. I prefer starting on the underside of the arm so that I can, again, continue just as a single spiraling loop go around the entirety of the Poppet. One of the important things to remember about Poppets is they are for practical purposes. And you don't need to spend a lot of money making them. This yarn is left over from some project that I don't even remember what was. I don't even know if it was my project because it's just been floating around the house for ages. The buttons, I bought that entire jar super cheap. I think it was $4 for the entire jar. And the felt that I cut the hearts out of was just craft felt that I think was $1 a sheet. It's also marvelous how much you can speed up the time something takes when you are using video editing, because I sped up the process of crafting this by 15 times to make it fit into a more reasonable video. Because my cord wasn't quite long enough to save some after, this would be finished up with a second piece of thread once it's stuffed. This Spanish moss I just got from the flower arranging department at Walmart. It was also very cheap. Like I said previously, you can also use discarded scraps of fabric where you would just cut it up into small pieces so that you can use it more as batting rather than as pieces of fabric. So now that our basic construction of the Poppet is done, everything else from this point forward varies dramatically depending on whether you're trying to help the person or curse the person. Use the intention of your spell to inform what you would add next. You can add essential oils, the moss will absorb it. You can add, if you're trying to bind someone, duct tape, and you can stick them in a jar, along with other items that you would be using to manifest the baleful intent on that person. Simultaneously, you could take it and put it in something nice to provide a place of relaxation, because, for example, this bowl is decorated with lilies, and so that's a calming, joyful experience. And you could then do something like add selenite to it because you're trying to help cleanse and purify their space. You could add malachite because you want to protect them from psychic attack. You could put them in the center of a crystal grid. Poppets at this point are whatever you need them to be. They are one of the most basic representations of another person that you could ever use. One of the ones that I was taught was, if they are speaking ill intent towards you, pin them to a bar of soap through the mouth. So like literally take them, push their face into it, and then put a pin to essentially wash their mouth out with soap. The key component here is they are a representation of an individual. So any way that you can imagine to use the symbolism, the correspondences to affect that individual, you can do it with a Poppet. I hope this has been helpful for you, and until next time, walk in the light, my friends.